to the UIAAA Connection podcast. GoFan and VNN are proud to be the exclusive sponsor of the UIAAA Connection. Now a combined company, GoFan and VNN provide a seamless integration for digital ticketing and athletic websites. Direct your fans to one place for all your athletic events, communications, and tickets to home and away games. Thank you to GoFan and VNN for their exclusive sponsorship of the UIAAA Connection.
Welcome back to another edition of the UIAAA Connection. I'm your host, Mark Hutch Hunter. Today we have as our special guest, Doug Killgore, Certified Master Athletic Administrator, currently retired athletic director, but formerly secretary of the NIAAA. Welcome to the podcast, my friend.
Thank you very much, Hutch. I am honored to be here and proud to keep the associations going, even though I am retired, which doesn't mean I'm not working.
Right. You and me both retired, and we're still working, so I like it. So let's have you begin and share with, I like to say this now, it's our international audience. It just used to be nationally, but now we have an international audience. I want you to share where you grew up, where you went to college, your first job, etc.
Well, I grew up in a lot of places. My dad was in the Air Force. So I was born in Pasadena, Texas, just outside of Houston, but in reality, I never lived there. Very shortly after I was born, they started moving around for during post-Korean War thing. Lived from Washington State to the UP of Michigan, to Puerto Rico, to Guam.
Where did you live in the UP? I'm interested because
Marquette. There was a Air Force base there, Kinchlow Air Force Base. I don't think it's there anymore.
No, it's a regional airport, and I know exactly where Kinchlow Air Force Base is. You'll find this interesting. As you know, I served a mission, and I was in Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan for 2 months of that Michigan, and Kinchlow Air Force Base was 15, 20 miles from Sault Ste. Marie. We would go out there to visit some people and visit the members there. And so that's my connection to the UP. So see, we have something. Sorry to interrupt. Continue.
No, that's all right. It's a small world. And I think there was some time that he was, I think it was called K.I. Sawyer. Also, there were two bases in for those Upers. And so, it was a life. How did you stand it? How could you do that? Well, I didn't know anything different. Wasn't like I did 15 years in one place and then did it again, moving all over. But it was some great experiences, especially the overseas ventures, as I was at the age of playing outside all the time and just picking snacks off the fruit trees in the back of people's yards. Other than that, then I settled in, graduated from high school in Shreveport, Louisiana, Woodlawn High School. You might recognize that. I was in the same graduating class as Joe Ferguson of Arkansas and Buffalo Bills fame.
There you go.
And prior to us graduating, Terry Bradshaw also graduated from there. Then went to college at Harding College in Arkansas, just north of Little Rock, in a little town called Searcy. After that, I went to grad school at North Texas State University then, which has since become the University of North Texas, in a field totally unrelated to what my profession ended up being. But after 3 years down in that area, I came back to Arkansas, got my teaching certificate. My first job was in Jacksonville, Arkansas, at a little private school, Central Arkansas Christian School. They were just beginning their athletic program as part of the Activities Association for Arkansas. So I was in those days, Hutch, you probably remember them. You coached everything all the time.
Absolutely.
There was, in fact, I was even doing 4 seasons because there wasn't softball at that time. But I coached girls softball that was basically kind of a summer league team, but made up of girls at the school. So that kind of got me in going to it. And actually, I did my grad work in vocal performance. Well, I did my undergrad work in vocal performance also, and sang opera off and on for 3 years in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And ultimately, that wasn't going to be a very stable lifestyle career, and for a lot of reasons, not just money. Came back into school, and as everybody said when I was going through the undergrad, they said, you better get your education degree. You better get, nope, I will never teach school. You will not find me ever teaching school. Even though I had worked summer camps for about 6 years, mostly with middle school and high school kids. So in doing that, I didn't have much to do for the education side, so I added a physical education certification as well, and that kept me going down the road to directing chorus, being involved in drama, teaching various courses, and doing PE and quite a bit of coaching.
All right. Well, so I'm interested in your youth sports background, because if you were an Air Force brat, excuse the language. So
Totally
obviously you were moving at least possibly once a year, sometimes twice a year. You may play baseball in the summer in the UP and play basketball in Guam in the winter. So did you get, I mean, I would think you don't have the normal younger years because you don't have the same teammates going to the same place to play because you moved around so much. Talk about that for a minute.
Well, I'm sure, as you are quite aware, there's very little about me that is normal under any definition of the word. But most of my youth stuff was baseball. When we got to Puerto Rico, I think about the 4th or 5th grade, I started Little League. And it was as it is now in the islands down there. Baseball was a really big sport and undertaking. And I know we lived on the base, and the various squadrons, they all sponsored their teams, and some of the men in the squadrons were the coaches on the teams. But I got started in baseball, and I don't remember if it was the 4th or 5th grade, but somewhere in there, and played before going to Michigan. There was not a whole lot of baseball opportunities up there because there weren't too many kids, and the summer was only 3 days long in the Upper Peninsula. So it was tough you had to play a lot of double headers there. But my claim to fame, 2 claims to fame. I remember the baseball coach we had for Little League, his name was Manny, and he also played on the squadron softball team. So this goes back to the early 60s. And they were playing fast pitch men's softball, and he was a shortstop and just a super athlete. But opening day, I believe it was probably in either opening day of 61 or 62. We had the big festivities at the Little League opening, and Joe DiMaggio came to celebrate that first opening of Little League season. And I still have a baseball that Joe DiMaggio signed that many years ago. Moving here, awesome. There, and yonder, I stayed with baseball, the Sandlot stuff. I've listened to a couple of the shows here lately. I think Mark Armstrong mentioned some stuff about a lot of Sandlot, and you made reference to the movie Sandlot.
Right.
But a lot of baseball, got into some bigger schools elsewhere in Michigan, and did some wrestling for a couple of years in early high school. Then ended up moving down south, and I had a very illustrious career in football. I played left out and way back in my football career, and also specialized in the spring sports of track. I was a javelin catcher and a shot put retriever. So these were some great, but enjoyed the camaraderie and did what I could and that kind of stuff. Did not pursue it into college at all, other than being quite active in intramurals. The school had a very large intramural program, and I made some impact there in flag football and basketball, and even swimming at the time. I could do one end to the other without drowning, so that automatically qualified me as to be on the club swim team.
That is excellent. Talk for a minute about the mentors that you've had in your life at a young age, at a middle age, and in your older age, people that have made a difference along the way for you.
Well, of course, parents come to mind, and mostly, I guess, my mom. My dad was gone quite a bit of necessity. For a good bit of that time, he was a pilot, so he was in and out. And later on, he moved up the ladder a bit and got into some administrative positions. But mom and dad were around all the time and did their kind of thing. I do remember Manny as being just a big influence in my baseball career, which was so illustrious. And as a testimony to my speed on the base paths, he gave me the nickname of Mule Train. Now, you can understand that however you want to, but I led the league in stretching a triple into a single more than any batter that would come to the plate. Otherwise, as I move up, I had a wrestling coach early on. His name was Wainwright, Coach Wainwright. He was also my driver's ed teacher, which is probably fairly common for the time. But he did a lot of influence on me about hard work and especially academics, because he taught math also. So I had him on 3 occasions for many opportunities. Our driver's ed career usually would consist of driving to a little town about 15 miles south of where I was in school to the donut shop. And we would pull in there and have a donut or two and then turn around, and the other kid in the car would drive back to the high school. But Coach Wainwright with wrestling and especially with math was very instrumental. I think maybe more on the academic side of life than otherwise. I move on up and as far as activities early on as an AD, when I got to that, Bill Mayo, whom you know, past president of the NIAAA, was very instrumental in getting me up and running as far as that career was concerned. Of course, as you came up a lot through the leadership training stuff, state coordinator and leadership in your state, I was very active in leadership training and the education side of our profession. And you get the greats like Jim Watkins, and I even knew and have had even subsequent interactions with Dr. John and the great things that he did in that program, but then also to me personally. Jim Watkins got me over a couple of hard spots. I had some trouble early years of being on the national faculty with a co-teacher. And he was very instrumental in calming things down and getting me to continue to be involved in that. Of course, as you were, and I think we even shared the boardroom for a year or two, Bruce and Mike, just great friends, great leaders and mentors. I was privileged to sit between them for many, 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 many days. And, there was a lot of slapping and pinching going on under the table to get me to keep my mouth shut kind of thing. So early on in the career, I also got to give a shout out to Annette Scoggin. She and I were both in the metropolitan Little Rock area in schools, and she was already in the profession, active, and we had conference meetings together. And very early on, probably late in the previous century, she was really pushing me to get involved and offering me these opportunities to go to conferences and do these kind of things. And we remained very close friends and comrades, as I like to say, because we are all in the same battles. It's not quite as serious by any means of military action and the things that are going on in the world, but we do things for one another. A lot of times our action is motivated and supported by that person with us in this battle, in essence, to stomp out ignorance and to give opportunities to these kids that are in our program. Well, I think that not very briefly, but there's been a whole lot of people that have mentored me and encouraged me over the years.
Thanks for sharing those great examples. Let me ask you this, Doug. What's your biggest failure or disappointment in life, and what did you learn from it?
My most recent and grandiose failure involved email and that dreaded button, reply all. I paid for that a long while. I had to do a lot of apologies and kissing and all this, that, and the other because of that brief moment of damage that was caused by a reply all. kind of situation. But I must say that has probably been 15 years ago, and that has never been a problem yet. That was the one and only I learned my lesson. Even proofreading, make sure I hit reply all. Probably even a more serious thing. I was an athletic director from 1979 to 1981, and I wish things had been where I would have stuck with it then, because I would have been, in the grassroots ground floors with the Bill Mayos and with all these people, that Frank Kovalevskis and all of these people that we have all worked with and know and have known and looked up to, these pinnacle of achievers within our profession. And it would have been, I wonder what would have happened had I stayed with it, stayed in education, and continued that path, which I think later on we'll get to. That path was quite a bit different back then than it is now, that's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So before we get into your work as an AD, I've got to ask this question out of order. People are going to want to know about the bow tie. Of course, you're famous for the bow tie, for your many bow ties. And so our listeners in the country, out of the country, are going to want to know about Doug Killgore and the bow tie.
I am not quite sure why it began. I know when it began was in the mid-90s. I was, at that point, I was just teaching and coaching, and I don't know where it came from, but I started and I learned shortly after that, at a break in the late 90s, at a break from education. My wife Sheila and I owned and operated a bed and breakfast inn. And a lot of our work was with food service. It wasn't like a restaurant, but we would have a lot of dinners and parties and wedding receptions and this, that, and the other. And the bow tie really picked up and became an exclusive, because I didn't have to worry about that falling into customers' faces or me spilling gravy on it or anything like that. It was just the convenience at that time. And, shortly by the turn of the century, it became a thing. And by then I was well entrenched on exclusivity. The only time I have worn a long tie since then was to make some kind of statement briefly, or in some kind of drama production or show or something like that the director really wanted it, being a gangster or something like, gangsters don't wear bow ties. And so I'd go along with the costume thing, but it since caught on. I know in 2013, I think, I had been wearing them for a good long while, but was sitting at a soccer game, a very cold soccer game in Arkadelphia, Arkansas. And the AD at the time, Chris, he offered me to come inside with him at the up in the press box where we were kind of sheltered from it. And so I happened to ask something about Twitter at the time and blah, 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 but how to do it, and had seen it working. And Chris Babb, there at Arkadelphia, he has since gone to teach at the university level now, but he was the one that came up with the moniker of Bowtie AD. So I'm probably looking at 10, maybe 11 years where that has been my Twitter handle, and has, as you mentioned, has spread into other areas as well, which is fine. I've been called worse, much worse things.
I love it. So let's go back now and examine. I want to make sure and say this correctly, because you're not the normal background of an AD. You're normal in the fact that you coach quite a bit, you played quite a bit, but people look at me, and because we teach the 790 together, and they say, because they look at you as a thespian, as someone and you mentioned your years in the opera earlier. And so I think people think that you came from a different world, even though you didn't come from a different world. So I want you to talk about the different world of an AD when actually you first became one back in 79, before you gave it up and then got back into it, and how the job is different now.
Oh,
and also, and also explain to everyone your little background, because anyone who's taken the 790 has heard your Man of La Mancha as we teach the class.
Well, I was very active in music growing up. Even elementary school, I started in the band. Due to church activities, I've been singing all my life. My mom played keyboard instruments, piano and organ a lot at home, so I was always around it. In fact, between some singing and playing in the band, I was a tuba player and a string bass, upright bass player. I managed to get a lot of my college paid for. So from that perspective, I stuck with it, and I tried all kind of other majors, but I was in the band and I was in the choir, even in college, and did a lot of singing. So ultimately, it came down to, after I dipped my hand in everything from pre-med to math to any number of other things, to Bible, and a lot of it came down. Well, the one that made the most sense and was the most fun was music and some kind of that. I played in the pit orchestra a lot of times in college. I was never on stage in college, but was really active in the shows and stuff. Then, of course, when I got out and had done some singing, went to grad school and got into opera. Ultimately, I came back to Arkansas and was in the Arkansas Opera Theater while I was going to working on getting my education degree. And it just morphed into that from activities in grad school and even undergrad, that I kept doing that. When I got my first job, one of the things I did, in addition to all the coaching, was I began the chorus program at that school, which had not really had much of a program before, and had a couple of groups doing that, and grew that up. Then I got into real work and started teaching and coaching. And probably about 15 years ago, the drama teacher at the school I was at, which I was the activities director, I was over all the extracurriculars and especially the fine arts. She encouraged me to audition for a show at one of the community theaters. And I did, and got a part in Oliver, which was my first one after probably 25 years of being absent from the stage. And then that grew with various community theaters in and around Little Rock, and I played several roles in several productions. I managed to sink the Titanic as Captain Edward Smith, probably in public performance, probably close to 30 times. I never could save that puppy. I don't know what the deal, and I even knew the iceberg was coming. But that was a big one. And then it became kind of a smooth transition, and probably not done too often. I was on the stage at the school I was working at. It was a financial decision, in that if there was a role needed for someone old, the drama department could save a whole lot of makeup and hair color if I just stepped into that old role. And they didn't have to do any coaching or training about a kid to be old. So that is where it went. So even concurrently, I remember in the late 70s, even as I was coaching football, and this was even varsity, it was a super cold night, because I remember I had on a big overcoat. And of course, this was back in the day where coaches dressed up for ball games. And I had on this big overcoat, and I had to go up to the press box because I sang the national anthem, came back down and coached the football game. So it has been around for a good while. And it has, my perspective, fine arts groups, extracurricular groups, student council, thespians, all of that kind of stuff, they're teams. And the people that lead them are coaches. And the same principles we apply in athletics, about teamwork, about leadership, about example, about fundamentals, they can gain the same benefits from that extension of the classroom as we can in our traditional athletic ventures.
I love it. Let's go specifically now. You talked about how Bill Mayo and Annette got you involved. So how did you get to be from I shouldn't say a no-name AD, but just a newer AD, and then all of a sudden you're involved with the Arkansas Association, and now you're with your state coordinator, you're on the national faculty with the NIAAA. How does all that happen? Take us through that.
Well, about the turn of the century, like I said, Annette and I were in the Little Rock area, both in schools, and we would have conference meetings, especially with middle school and this kind of stuff. But as I recall, it began as a situation of being voluntold that I will come to the state conference. And it ended up being a yes, ma'am, yes, ma'am. And after doing that for a year or two, it repeated itself with Bill Mayo, who passed away this past spring. And, he was a giant in Arkansas, and especially working with the founding and the immediate early growth of the NIAAA as a past president. And another gentleman in Arkansas, Jim Rowland, who was very active in the state and mentoring younger ADs. They voluntold me that I would become involved with leadership training, all the way to the position of, oh, by the way, you're going to be the state coordinator. There's a meeting in September. You need to go to it. So that is really what got me going. By being in various conferences, they're in the center part of the state where the population was, due to school size and the districting by the state association. We never knew what direction we were going in. We might have had to go west to make up a conference, or go east or north or south. But many times within these conferences, I would volunteer to take minutes. And, I was fairly computer literate all the way back into the 90s, and would take minutes. And it kind of began, so for several years, with the state association, I was the secretary before it really became much of an office. Through my activities at the state, I had a great buddy that he and I worked together on state coordinator stuff, Jerry Cecil, who has since retired. And we had it down pat between the two of us, the division of duties, who would do what, where, keeping notes and stuff up. And it just worked out to be a most enjoyable venture. I guess so much so that I am still in it, even though I don't live in Arkansas anymore. I am still in it, trying to bridge the gap while I'm training one state coordinator, and then in turn training another one. And probably another year or so, I will be out of that completely, but worked my way up through the leadership. And I think in 2010 or 11, I was the president, and then just stayed with it, stayed active, because it was such a joy. And well, that's how it happened with the state. I think somewhere along, did you mention the NIAAA too at that point? Is that right?
Well, and so now, yeah, the NIAAA. So, and then I'll put this with the next question. So you get involved with the NIAAA, you'll talk about that, and then talk about how it is you became secretary for 6 years. So continue.
Somewhere along the line, I think maybe about 2002. Once again, Annette Scoggin voluntold me to go to the national conference. And the first one, I didn't do a whole lot. I just, went to some sessions, and I didn't really, because it was fairly late. And then it wasn't quite as popular as it has become. So this early registration was not a big deal. But I was like, yeah, this is good. And as so many people have said silently, I think, you would see these blue jacket people walking around. And given I guess my dress kind of idea, I was like, I need a sport coat like that. Yeah, that looks really good. And then I found out a little more about it. The next year I went back, and I think I took 4 LTI classes in that conference, and probably did that for 2, 3, 4 years to try to catch up on these things, because I was falling behind. And, ever since then, I've been to all of them since probably, I guess 2002 might have been the first one. And now, secretary, I don't have any clue. That's a tribute to the people who had no clue what they were doing when they voted for me, because I had no background. I had no committee service. I think I'd maybe done a workshop or two, and I had taught on the national faculty for a couple of courses, specifically 617. I was a course chair for that for a few years with Kevin Adams out of Virginia. about sports medicine administration. So I had kind of had a bit of a face. I don't really think I'd started singing much. I don't think we did our Christmas Carol routine at the conference hutch.
Right.
But and then it just kind of, somebody, I don't know where the idea came from, but it was like, turn in your intent to run and see and fill out the pre-form and, to see if you had the qualifications and all that. And it happened. And as it came down to that year in 2010 was the election to replace the irreplaceable Holly Farnese.
Right.
She had been the secretary for even an extended period of time. I think technically it's about 6 years, but because of Bruce going into the executive directorship and stuff, I think she had filled the spot maybe 7 or 8 years. But I met back and forth with her, and all I ever did, you didn't politic then, you didn't campaign, but you just gave that speech. Now, this would be one of the things that is really strange. I was the shortest person in the race. Big Rich ran for secretary that year, and Todd Gilkey ran for secretary that year. So here I get up there at 6'3" and a piece of paper, and I was the shortest guy in the race. But I guess whatever happened with that presentation, that 3-minute speech, was enough to sway people one way or another. So that is how that began.
So I want you to talk about, you could probably pick 20 stories, but I just want you to pick your favorite story from being on the board, because I know each year the board is different, but they have their own personality. But there's so much folklore with those board stories. I'm interested in your best story as you served on the board.
Oh, well, some of those things, what stays in the concierge lounge, what's said in the concierge lounge stays in the concierge lounge. But I would say one of my great memories is the impact that Holly had on me about the seriousness of the role. And as the secretary is the longest board position that there is by design. And she said, I think she used the term, you are the gatekeeper of the board history and thus of the NIAAA. Because as people come and go from the board, you're the one that connects things. You've got to have the historical perspective to see, well, why are we doing this? Well, I remember back whatever, this is where this, we have already talked about that. It has already been hashed over, and various things, or what is the reason we do these kind of things? And she laid on me not a guilt trip, but a responsibility trip to continue to do that. And her passion and perspective on that continues to remain with thee. So that is a tremendous memory and a challenge that I had to live up to as I took over when she left. I think probably another great memory, and if anybody was going to pat themselves on the back, this would be mine, albeit my participation was fairly limited, is as the time Bruce was retiring, I was on the board at the time of selecting Mike to assume the position of executive director. And then I was in the group through the entire process of hiring another assistant director, whichever, I think assistant director. And that I have never been in an experience where hairs were split any finer than that, because there were multiple people who would have been supremely qualified and able to do that job. But my perspective is going through all of that was that I think the group of us that participated in that, and there were many hours of discussion, many hours of back and forth of throwing paperwork down on the table and sorting it and doing and looking, that I really do think that this group effort hit a home run by selecting Phil Risen as our nominee to the board, and then him being approved for that position. So that is something, quite honestly, that I hang my hat on as, I was a small part in that, and that has perpetuated the leadership diamonds that previous people, especially Bruce and Mike, have handed off to Phil, and now Rich and Becky, as they move us forward in those leadership positions. There was any number of other things, but I think those are the ideas that probably had the most impact on me, and I'd like to think the most impact on the NIAAA as well.
Thanks for sharing that insight. I want you to talk for a minute about teaching leadership training. And I'm not going to go with, obviously, the course you and I teach, the 790. You've had the unique opportunity, not once, but I think twice, maybe even more, to teach leadership training internationally. So I want you to take a minute or two to talk about that. And maybe, because those international ADs, a road trip for them is a little bit different than going 10 minutes down to the next high school. So talk about that.
Oh man, Hutch, that is probably the singular greatest blessing I have had, professional blessing in my career as an athletic administrator and in my association with the NIAAA. Ultimately, it began with a, what? Why me? Mike Blackburn, I believe it was, called me and said, we've had this request to and I had taught some leadership training, and even at the national level, like I said, 617, you got me involved in 790. I had been part of the faculty for some of the legal courses as well. So I had dabbled in it. And of course, at the state level, as you know, we do. When we need teachers, we step up and do it and do what we have to get prepared. But one day I got a call from Mike, and he made this offer that there's a group of athletic directors in Asia that want some leadership training classes taught at their conference. And well, I ran it through my administration at school. Here's what it's going to be. He was very specific with the dates. Of course, all the expenses were going to be paid and so forth and so on. But I was going to end up missing, probably 9 days of school or something like that to do this. But an outfit called EARCOS, East Asia Regional Council of Schools, and this is all international schools. I can't go into that because we're limited on time and recording tape, but it is an amazing group of all the international schools regionally, which for EARCOS, it probably went from China, Japan, Korea, Vietnam, Thailand, the Philippines, the islands, and just that whole gamut of geographical locations. They had what they called a leadership conference, and it was for heads of school, boards, financial planners, bookkeepers, academic deans, and all of these kind of positions. But they also had a track for athletic administrators. And I went and taught several courses. First one was in Bangkok, Thailand. Getting there was somewhat of a nightmare. I think it took like 33 hours for me to finally get from here to there via, I'm trying to think where I went through. I think I went through Seoul, went through Shanghai, and then down to Bangkok. And that was
So you're saying it adds new meaning to the song One Night in Bangkok, but I digress. Continue.
Yes. Oh, yes. And those ADs were amazing. They're doing the same stuff we're doing. Yes, as you mentioned, their travel involves visas, their travel involves guards, their travel involves expense, multiple nights. And one of the fascinating things is when a school, say in Shanghai, would host a tournament, that school, that host school, it was incumbent upon them to put the kids up as homestays. This was pre-COVID. So you didn't have hotels. They would stay, the kids from one school would stay with the kids from another school in their homes. But that's another story as well. So that trip was what it was. I made a lot of great friends. In 2019, now this is on them. They asked me to come back again. They were going to have another Ear Coast conference, this time in Kota Kinabalu, Malaysia, which is actually on, I guess, the northwestern tip of the island of Borneo. Well, I knew what I was getting into, so I was going to make that one a little bit of an excursion. By that, I don't necessarily mean pleasure, although the entire thing was pleasurable. But I stopped in Seoul, Korea for a couple of days. I spoke at the Seoul International School in Seoul, Korea, met their AD and spoke even to some of their faculty members on some leadership ideas, worked my way down to Kota Kinabalu, stayed there for, I think, maybe 5 nights at their conference, and in beautiful surroundings, great people. And on the way back, I went to Manila, the Philippines. My host for both of these trips was Kathy Tanko Ong. She taught and still does at the Brent International School on, I guess, the south part of Manila. But I went to visit her, went to her school, and did some stuff as well, including with the chorus and the orchestra at Brent. And then she arranged one of the greatest amazing things to me. I'm a reader of military history. That's about all my library is filled with, is military history books. And I haven't been blessed to write a novel, as some people on this podcast have been. But nevertheless, she arranged for me a tour excursion of Bataan and the island of Corregidor. And the picture on my background was taken from the top of the island of Corregidor, looking back toward Manila Bay. And it was an amazing trip. I'd read so much about it, but all of it stemmed. Of course, the reason for the trip was the teaching, the sharing, the mentoring, the being mentored. And honestly, if I was a younger man, even then, I would go teach at an international school. It is an incredible adventure and facing things that we cannot imagine going on here in the U.S. So, from that perspective, man, this involvement, it went to full bloom then, and I still interact with them during COVID. I conducted Zoom classes, as I'm sure you're well aware of, and most of our listeners, for Mongolia, for Africa, for Shanghai, China. Scott Hosick was there, and he wanted all of the ADs in Shanghai to come together, and we did a class or two. So it continued, even though not in person, it did continue via technology and offering and mixing and mingling with these people that I had known over the past few years.
What a great blessing for you, and what a great blessing for those ADs. So thank you so much for giving us that insight. We'll finish up with a couple of questions.
Good.
The first one being, you've got 2 suggestions. You've got Bowtie's 2 suggestions for a new AD in order to be a success. They've got to follow your suggestions in order to get that success. What would those 2 suggestions be?
Well, I have listened to nearly all of your podcasts and several others. It seems the get involved is probably one of the premier recommendations people give. I hope my past and what we've already talked about testifies to that. Also, the be aware of your time, and make sure you have a life out there. So I'm going to go a little bit direction of that, and I think this is mainly. This may also encompass like things to new ADs in our generation. You have got to pay attention to the academics of the job. And by that, I mean we have a very knowledgeable constituency that athletics serves. I think parents are much more educated about athletics. And as a result of that, some of them are much more litigious and are willing to jump into lawsuits and beginning litigation for anything they see as shortcomings. And the only way we can combat that is to prepare ourselves to do things the right way for the right reasons and make sure those things are targeting the right people, and that is the students we work with. And I guess leading on that is risk management. There are so many things that can go wrong. Mark, I see a little smudge on your forehead. I'm guessing probably somewhere a coach told you to rub a little dirt on it. It'll be okay. Those days are gone.
Yeah.
Those days of getting your bell rung and taking 2 aspirin and getting back in the game don't happen anymore. And that would be my number one suggestion, to make sure that you are prepared academically. And then secondly, I would say, and a means to that number one is attend, listen, and learn. And I don't care where you're going. If it's an area conference meeting, if it's a region sectional, if it's your state conference, amen, go, the national conference, attend, listen, and learn. Those are not going to serve you very well if you consider them just to be junkets to go and play, and not exclusively, but you can't spend your whole time playing golf and being in the casino and eating in restaurants and doing the boot scoot boogie and all of these things. When you go to those, you've got to take advantage of those and prepare yourself to do that. Very briefly, secondly, one of the things I learned with about, I guess, 7 or 8 years in my career left was learn to say no. If I was a beginning AD, the first people I would target would be my fellow administrators and get their support, get their cooperation. The expectations of an athletic administrator these days, you cannot afford to be out on the job 5 and 6 days a week. At some place, you've got to learn to say no, delegate, cooperate, get the principal, get an assistant principal, somebody to go and provide supervisory things. And I don't remember who it was on one of your recent podcasts. It might have been David Suter out of New Jersey. I think he might have mentioned something about the turnover.
Yep.
And how ADs are not staying around. They're not lifers, career people. Well, yeah, they're burning out. You got to learn to say no.
Well, that's well said. We'll finish with this, Douglas. What question should I have asked you that I failed to ask you?
Well, the one I thought of, which you really kind of addressed, how did you get from opera to athletic administration? We've already talked about that one.
Right.
I don't know, Hutch. You pretty, we've known one another for many years, and you've covered a lot of stuff, and and I know, and it's just, what am I going to do from here? Well, I'm probably going to continue doing what I'm doing, but my trips that require air transfer are going to get fewer and fewer and fewer. And
yes.
I am so glad that one of my last trips was to the UIAAA conference in St. George's a couple of years ago. This is kind of flying is no fun anymore. It is stress causing. You don't know when you're going to get there. Is all your stuff going to get there? Now, if I can drive somewhere, me and Bob Hopek, or me and
Fred Smith.
Fred Smith. If we can drive, we'll go and do all I can. But man, that's been a great ride, but not most of those great rides were not on an airplane.
Yeah, I show up to go to the NEDC in Michigan. Flight leaves at 6 a.m. I round the corner to get on because I've checked in. Then they tell me it's a 4-hour delay. Anyway, I can't go there. But so on that, we shall finish this episode of the UIAAA Connection. Again, our guest today has been Doug Killgore, Certified Master Athletic Administrator and opera singer extraordinaire. Thank you so much, Bowtie, for being on the show.
I will add one thing. I don't plan to go to the conference this year due to other circumstances. Number one, I'm getting my knee replaced December 18th, but I shall truly miss our caroling with your wife and Bruce's wife and what we do after that thing. Those are so memorable times. So tell your beautiful wife, Deb, I said hello. And thanks for this opportunity.
Will do. And for our listeners, we hope you tune in again next week for another edition of the UIAAA Connection.